Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody is having a beautiful day. I hope that if you find yourself in a bit of a funk, you realize it's always dark before the light. And maybe there's some meaning in chaos. Maybe if you just take a time of quiet contemplation, you'll figure something out. That's what I like to do when I find myself feeling a little bit blue. I have the antidote if you're feeling down, though, because I have Dr. Janice Campbell today. Dr. Janice Campbell, a licensed acupuncturist, Chinese herbalist, and somatic touch practitioner, possesses a unique superpower for recognizing the unspoken and transforming it into valuable assets, skills, and opportunities. Her multifaceted approach extends to in-person services, including acupuncture, herbal medicine, and somatic touch, with a specialty in stress trauma recovery. Janice's expertise is not confined to physical presence. She offers distance, mind-body integration through guided somatic meditations, seasonal integration, and energy work, leaving a lasting impact on individuals and corporations worldwide. As an ordained officiate through open ministry, Dr. Campbell conducts ceremonies and celebrations for all rites of passage, including weddings, unweddings, funerals, and naming ceremonies. Her thoughtful approach and ability to navigate sensitive situations earned her praise and appreciation from clients across the globe. Beyond her therapeutic services, Dr. Janice is a distinguished entrepreneur, co-founder of 5 Seasons Learning, a founding member of the Octopus Movement, and co-founder of Acupuncture for Veterans in Maryland. She wears various hats, a namer and a tamer of elephants in the room, an old school B in the LGBTQIA community, a teacher, a bridge builder, cultural creative, speaker, mom, partner, friend, writer, artist, musician, pluviophile, ambivert, and lover of words, logophile. Additionally, she proudly identifies as a recovering AEA stage manager, showcasing her diverse and dynamic contributions in the field she engages in. Dr. Janice, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about. You seem to have covered it all. So.
Well, thanks for coming out today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed the show. No.
My work here is done. All right.
Well, you know, you have an ability to see things without saying things. So maybe we could talk about, like, let's just jump into that. Like, what does that even mean? Like, seeing the unseeable and knowing the unknowable. Like, what does that come from?
Well, I mean, the reason I use the phrase naming and taming the elephants in the room is because half the time when I point something out, people go, "Oh, right." It's like the old doctor joke. Doc, it hurts when I hit myself in the head with a board. Don't hit yourself in the head with a board. I mean, a lot of what I do, or as one person I know and love likes to describe it, my job is to point out the blatantly obvious. And so a lot of that is pointing out the things that you might have noticed if you were 3, but there have been layers of all sorts of other stuff and ignoring of things and whatever since then. And so I pointed out and you're like, wow, I had no idea. Oh yeah, that would be easier. I'll do that. So it's, in some ways my job is really easy in that I just sort of watch and go, I wonder if it would be easier if we did this. And that applies whether or not I'm seeing my patients in person, with acupuncture and all my other bag of tricks, or if I'm dealing with one of my online clients for a distance mind-body integration session. Mm-hmm. A lot of that is, I like to think of it as therapeutic improv. It's listening to what is going on with the person, and then in the moment creating a somatic guided meditation that allows them to actually move things. And in a lot of cases, anything that I'm doing is making a suggestion based on all the things I've ever done or known or seen or heard or watched or observed, and that have seemed to have helped somebody else or that seem to fit with what's going on. And then they do all the work. Even when I put the needles in, all the needles or the herbs or I are making is a suggestion of, hey, you remember when it was easier? Maybe you should do it that way. And then the person does all the work. So in some ways, it's a whole lot simpler than my first career as a theatrical stage manager, where I was running around doing everything and getting everybody else to do everything else. And And I get a lot more sleep now than I did in my first career. And people are much more likely to say thank you, which is also nice.
It's an interesting concept to unveil patterns of perception, you know, and a lot of times when you are saying things that may seem obvious to you, but they don't seem obvious to the people that find themselves in that negative feedback loop, or they find themselves in that destructive pattern. I once heard a great quote that was something along the lines of, people don't go to therapy in order to solve a trauma. They go there to become cognizant of a pattern. And, you know, they realize, I'm stuck in this pattern, and if I don't seek help, I'm going to be stuck here forever.
Right.
You know, and it's, you had mentioned early on, and when you just started, when you opened up, that, you know, you point out the obvious. Like, what is it about these layers? And is it conditioning that happens to us? Is it us wanting to fit in? Like, what are these layers of conditioning that don't allow us to see the patterns?
Well, a lot of the work that I do is helping people return to being their whole selves in the way that they were when they were little. If you, well, here's an example. We get this is an example of how we let stories and ideas overlay actual experience. When my son was like 2 years old, he got croup. And he walked into the room and he said, "I sound like a goose, make it stop." And so we did all the things, you know, and I gave him stuff, and we stuck his head in the refrigerator, and it went away. And, you know what, that's actually true. If you put a kid's head in if you open the freezer and let him breathe the cold air, sometimes it'll stop the croup. Anyway, and about a year later, and since then he'd learned what croup was, and, you know, whatever. And other people had talked about it in his play group and whatever. So a year later, he's a little over 3, and he gets croup again, and he flips out. And I'm like, "You just sound like a goose. We just have to do the thing we did last year, remember?" But he had gotten all these stories about it being bad and scary and all this other stuff from all these other people, that suddenly he was reacting to the stories that he had about it, as opposed to the fact that he sounded like a goose and he wanted it to quit. And so we're pretty much doing that all. So we kind of, we know the deal when we're little, as long as we're healthy, we're in a safe environment, you know. But we come in with a set of understandings that, you know, we're connected to everything and everybody, and this is how life rolls. And then as we get older, we start ignoring what our bodies tell us. We start ignoring our, you know, what we're eating. You know, we'll eat stuff that we don't like. We'll drink things we don't like. We'll skip meals. We'll put ourselves in situations that make us uncomfortable. We'll buy into other people's definitions of us, you know, and it builds and builds and builds. And then we start to, instead of having that smooth flow of chi or smooth flow of energy of a little kid, we'll start to clunk rather than roll. And then, so a lot of it is, you know, just saying, remember why don't we get you back to doing this thing? You know, you're actually, one of my favorite things to say to anybody anybody really, is, you're a grown up. You can eat dessert first. I have a good friend who's married to a guy from Merida, Mexico. And he, when he's out to dinner, he always orders his dessert first so he can see how big it is, so he knows how much other food to order. And whenever a wait staff person looks at him funny, he says, "It is my culture." And his wife, who's American, says, "It is not your culture. I lived in Merida for a year. Nobody does this but you." And he looks at her and he goes, "It is my culture." But that same idea of, you know, getting back to a smooth flow that we're all capable of, we just forget.
What do you think that also speaks to our relationship with uncertainty?
It can. It can, and it depends on what uncertainty you're met with in your life. Some uncertainty is ooh, what next? And some uncertainty is what next? You know, and so how we deal with that, and how we learn to move with that and roll with not knowing everything, or not, you know, and how strongly we feel the need to be prepared, and all of those things absolutely start to affect the stories that we tell and the way that we carry them in our bodies. And that's that uncertainty can play out in bravery. It can play out in fear. It can play out in being frozen. I mean, all the trauma responses are from uncertainty, right? I don't know how to respond to this. And so being able to complete some of those impulses and or being able to not just rewrite the story from a mental standpoint or an emotional standpoint, but also thanking our bodies for going into that fight or flight, but we don't need it anymore. Mm-hmm. We can let that. You're good at that. You'll do it again if I need you to, but we don't need to do that right now. I think that definitely plays into it. But I also think but to some degree, also everything else plays into it. Sure. Whether or not, how easily we feel loved, how easily feel like we belong, how easily our creative ideas are accepted, how easily the way we physically move in the world is accepted. I mean, all those things will play into what stories we would, unless there's a conscious effort. Well, I don't know. Some people actually probably just pull it off without there being a conscious effort. And for some of us, unless there's a conscious effort towards how do I make this big enough to live in? This is too tight. How do I draw a big enough circle that I can breathe in here? Then we get trapped and we don't even know we're trapped, and we think it's the way it is, and it's not. It's like one of my dear mentors and one of the founders of the acupuncture school that I went to, Bob Duggan, used to say, you can fall in love and you can fall in love and stump your toe, and your response is, I have a toe. Isn't that great? Or you can be going about your everyday life and stump your toe, and you gripe about it all day long, and you get mad at the thing you tripped on, and you tell everybody for sympathy as much as you possibly. It doesn't change the fact that you have a toe.
Right.
And so all of that all of the above.
Yeah. It's interesting, the perspective of the foundational myths through which we live. When I think about perspective and mythology, I think about my life, and I think about sometimes I'm playing the role of the main character, and sometimes I'm playing the role of like a supporting character. But if people can do that, like that's a cool little hack that I found for people listening or watching the show, is who are you playing in the story you're telling? Are you playing the main character, or are you an observer? And sometimes you can switch back and forth, but it really helps you change the perspective of what's happening in your life. It's interesting to think about the idea of foundational myths, stories we tell ourselves, and the way it plays out in our lives. On the topic of navigating the unspoken, in your work, you acknowledge the unspoken and transform it into assets. Can you share a profound instance where recognizing the unspoken led to a significant positive transformation in an individual or a group?
Well, I do want to just add one thing.
Yeah, of course.
You can be a supporting role. You can be a lead role, but it can also be a company cast. It can also be a story about a group of people.
I like that.
And so then you're not, that's a different story altogether.
Or an author. You could be the author. Sometimes I like to play with that idea too. That's kind of an even better one, because then you have control. But sometimes it's good to play all the positions and then come back to the author, right?
Right. Or as the Xanders, I've forgotten their first names. It's a husband and wife team. They wrote a book called The Art of Possibility. Ooh. And as they say, one of their things is, what if you're not a piece in the game? What if you're the board?
Ooh, I like that.
What if you're the board? Yeah. And what if you're the board, and how did that piece end up on the board, since you're the board? How did you let that in, or how did you give it that kind of space? Anyway, that's not the answer. That's not your question. But
that's okay. Let's think about that for a minute. I've never really heard that aspect before. If you are the board, then what kind of questions does that bring up? Does that bring up the question of who are you allowing to play? Or
no, well, I mean, the example that they give, and of course it's been a minute since I've read the book, so apologies if I don't do this right. The example that they give is a woman who's waiting at a red light in her car, and somebody slams into her in the back. And so when she's the victim, then she's outraged. You know, when she's concerned about the person driving and if they're okay, because why would they do that? Then she's somehow anything that might need to be tended in her isn't taken care of. When she's the board, it's I have to accept that anybody getting into a car is there's a percentage of risk in driving a car anywhere, even if it's, you know, in a parking lot by yourself. And so part of that is I got in the car to drive. And part of that is I can tell this story in multiple ways. I'm lucky that I just got bumped and I have good car insurance and my things are now taken care of. What are their things? You know, it takes the element of personal it takes blame and the either or the us and them conversation out of it.
I like that.
When it becomes, what's the whole picture of this?
Right.
It's like years ago when I was in undergrad, after I was in undergrad, I lived in London for a year, and The Guardian did this great television ad where first you see this guy running and run into this woman and knock her down. And then they pull the camera back and you see him run into her and get caught and grab her purse and keep running. And then they pull back even further and you see them running and grab her purse, turn around, grab her and pull her out of the way because a piano's falling. And so it's like, which are you looking at the whole story? Are you seeing the piano fall and realizing that, yes, all these other things happened in this context? Or are you looking at, you know, he's stealing her purse? What a jerk. You know, so there's that. Apparently my lighting is deciding to change randomly. Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's fine.
So that's the way I think about it anyway. You can go read the book. They have many more profound things to say. In fact, I like to reread it every several years and I just it's not in my loop at the moment. But it does give perspective on, you know, on the storyline, so to speak.
That's a great way to see it. And that's a beautiful picture that they've painted, because that, if you just take a moment to realize all those different things, then it can really change the way, not only your perspective, but it can change the way you act accordingly, right? Or the words you say, the story you tell, everything about it.
Well, and it comes down to even just small interactions.
Yeah.
Like, one of the teaching stories I use in my practice is, you know, when people come in complaining about their coworkers, I'm like, so, okay, somebody walks into your office and they drop a folder on your desk and they go, and they turn around and walk out. You could tell the story that they hate you. You could tell the story that they think your work is crap. You could tell the story that they started to say something and then they didn't. You could just as easily tell the story that their stomach hurts or they haven't eaten and their blood sugar's crashing and they don't think they can be coherent if they open their mouths right now. You can tell the story that somebody out in the hall really offended them and they're trying to process that and they just want to get you the folder. I mean, you can tell 1,000 stories about what happened, and none of those things, you don't know if any of those things are relevant unless you ask. Because all you actually have is they came into your office, dropped the thing on your desk, and then walked out. That's all you've got. Yeah, that's all the information you have. And so to be able to understand what's going on, even if they lie to you when they answer the question, you still only have that information. And making up what they're thinking that's never going to end well. Even if you're right, it's never going to end well. Right. Because it takes agency away from everybody and it twists the interaction in a way. And really, honestly, why do you care if they made that face at you? Just move on with your life. You know, you've got other things to worry about. And if you do have an issue with this person or you're worried about what they think about you, that's a conversation for another day. You got the folder you needed. Who cares?
Yeah, meaning. It's you can't control what happens to you, but you and you alone can control the meaning of that event. We should be careful with that, right?
Yeah. Well, and it also could be fun. It could be
Yeah.
fun to retell the story, to change it to a way that, because it's in opening up those stories, or in the scenarios where I'm naming the elephant in the room, it's so clear to watch the shift either in me or in the person that I'm talking to, that when the room opens up, when the story gets bigger, when there's more, the circle is bigger and there's more, their whole body changes. And so then my question is, what happened? What changed? How is your body different now that because that just shifted? What happened? I saw you take a bigger breath. I saw you lean back in your chair. Your right shoulder dropped. What did you experience? What happened in there? Because if you can figure out what happens in there without words, then you can lay breadcrumbs to get back there when you start feeling that shoulder go back up and you start feeling, you're like, oh no, wait, I know what that felt like. This is what this feels like. And if you if you look at small children or babies, their whole body is hungry, their whole body is angry, their whole body is happy, their whole body is sick. It is a full, complete deal all the time. And that's still true of us, but we have evolved, particularly in Western culture, to believe that, everything from here down is here to carry our head and our hands around. And when in fact, studies have shown that when you're happy, the chemical makeup of your toes changes. And so you're still responding to the world full body. You just don't know it. And or you're not acknowledging it. And so we start off with that full body response and engagement. And then people start giving us words for it. Oh, were you a happy baby? Oh, does that hurt? Is that painful? Oh, were you mad about something? You start getting words. And that's why people who are raised in households, like abusive households or over controlling or domineering or micromanaging spaces, get weird definitions for things like love or safety or responsibility or any number of other words. And then they carry those definitions with them, but their body's still having the same response it did before it had a word. And then on top of that, it's layering the response to the word on top of it, which if they line up and are congruous, it's the same response. But if they're not, they start to have this response and then they shut it up because that word says, don't do that. That word says, that's not happy. That's not who you are. That's not whatever. And so, yeah, anyway, I could rattle on about all sorts of things at the moment.
It's fascinating. It's like The Body Keeps the Score, right? That's a pretty good book that talks about what's really happening. But I love the idea about labels. It's interesting that labels have so much authority over the way in which we interact with our environment. Like I guess that's why they call it spells or magic. Like in some ways you're casting a linguistic spell on someone to make them see things from a certain point of view.
Well, and look at the different language. Different languages have different numbers of words to describe different experiences.
Yeah.
And how does that affect how the culture moves or how this culture sees something? It's really interesting to me. One of my many alternate lives that I should have veered off into when I was younger is studying languages and studying how they culturally affect how people respond to things given the way the language describes certain things. Because some languages have like one word for something where another language has 15, and it's a different experience altogether.
Yeah, what does it mean when some cultures have their number system is like 1, 2, 3, many. That table has many legs,
Right.
That table has 3 short legs and 4 tall. Like all of a sudden, the way in which you describe your environment has radical implications for the way you interact in it. It's kind of mesmerizing.
Exactly. I could run with that for days. I love that kind of stuff.
Me too. Imagine that.
Yeah. Funny that.
Yeah. So do you think that plays into naming and unnaming, or naming and taming things? Is that same sort of curiosity that you have with language?
Yeah. Oh, completely. Well, language, and also just, okay, well, I'm originally from the South, the southeastern part of America. And of course, I like to say you won't hear it unless I'm tired, drunk, or angry, or some combination thereof. But it shows up in words like Thanksgiving or insurance.
Sure.
But so story is the way that we interact with people. We tell people stories about ourselves. We tell people stories about other people. We tell people stories about our families. And so you collect them. And when you collect, when you make a friend, you're collecting them and their stories, to some degree. And then I went into theater for 15 years, which is nothing but storytelling, right? And then I moved into acupuncture, which oddly enough is still storytelling. And so, and the distance mind body integration work is even more storytelling. And so, I mean, it's sort of the way I do things. But that same mentor that I mentioned, Bob Duggan, is probably rolling over in his grave, because he's always like, he was like, stick with the phenomena, look at the phenomena, don't look at the story, which I agree with too. It's the thing about the folder and the coworker, right? The phenomena is they drop it on your desk. The story is the thing you make up. And humans being prone to stories, I'm all about helping people tell bigger, juicier ones.
Yeah.
And where was I going with this? I've wandered far afield. So I don't know. I've lost where I was, but there you go. There's that.
Yeah. Well, I think it speaks volumes of what we do in this world, especially when it comes to mental health or helping people, or even science for that matter. Science is a way in which we tell stories, in which we measure certain parts of the story. Oh, well, let's get rid of this stuff. I'm only going to tell you about what we can measure. Even though there's tons of variables in which we can't measure, I'm going to pretend those don't exist. I'm going to tell you this other story, why you're sick. You know why you're sick? Because you're eating these foods. You know why you're sick? Because you don't do that. But maybe there's a whole nother segment to that story that no one's talking about. And it's interesting how we decide to give up it's interesting how we allow ourselves to be part of someone else's storytelling. Like, we actually pay people to tell us a story so we can feel good about ourselves, so we can get help or help us get out of our own story, And I think,
it's also how we carry information, though.
Yes.
And we can only tell part of the story ever.
Right.
And so when it comes to science, which I'm also fascinated with, it's telling a snapshot of just that piece that we get now, right? It's like the people studying DNA, and for a long time people are like, yeah, there's all this junk DNA that's just like junk filler. It's like, it's like
ACTG. That's all we need.
Right. It's like bubble wrap in the or shredded cardboard. Yeah. And when in fact, it's not working if it doesn't work if all that stuff's not there, right? Yeah. But they could only tell that story. They'd only figured out that part of the story. And that's why science keeps evolving, because it's not that they were wrong. It's they only had that piece of the story, and then they discovered it's the Guardian television ad all over again. It's here's this piece of the story. No, wait, no, wait. It's actually this. And then who knows? Years later, it'll be like, actually, it's this. So
yeah.
So what my concern is when people get stuck in the story that's this big, or even the one that's this big. Even the one that's this big, and don't realize that it just keeps going, and so finding the one that people can move easily with, move emotionally, physically, mentally, culturally, societally, in their family, with their dog, with that's what I care about, because it's all about creating that smooth flow that we all got a glimpse of when we were little. When you're little and you're playing, half an hour can last 4 years.
Yeah.
If you're deep in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And then as we get older, half an hour lasts 15 seconds, depending on what you're trying to get done.
Yeah.
And that elasticity of presence and time also is part of what helps draw the bigger story. If you're willing to go into it and see, I mean, why not? Life is too short not to be having a good time. Why not be curious about all this stuff and curious about how to make it easier? You know?
I do. And I think that that's a great place for people to start if they find themselves, you know, in a bad spot because of health or because of a mental problem or because of a circumstance you can't control. Is there's all kinds of myths around time, and you as an individual, you get to make up your own idea of time, you know, and if you can change time, and if you don't believe me, people do this exercise. I mean, maybe don't do it, but at least listen to it. When you find yourself at a red light, sometimes that red light lasts forever. But if you pick up your phone, that light will change like that. You know what I mean? Like, probably shouldn't do that in traffic, but that's just an idea of how you can change time. You know, there's different kinds of time. There's what Mircea Eliade talks about, sacred time. And if you have ever been married, I've been married. So you and I have shared this time together. Even though we weren't in the same spot, both you and I can close our eyes and understand what that time was like, a time when someone's born. Like, we share these times. But it's all these stories we have around time that allow us to close in and sometimes make us sick. Because if you look at depression, it's being trapped in the past, or anxiety is being trapped in the future. So our relationship with time is one factor that can make us sick, right?
Absolutely. And lots of times that's the thing that needs to shift for everything else to correct. And that's not saying, you know, that things don't happen or get lodged in the body in such a way that it becomes an actual concrete thing that you've got to do something about.
Right.
That's true too. I mean, people are in disfiguring, or in car accidents that disfigure them in some way. It's going to change how they emotionally and mentally move in the world, and vice versa. Everybody knows or has heard of somebody who's worried themselves into a stomach ulcer. You still have to do something about the stomach ulcer, and let's also address the worry, because you don't want another one.
Yeah,
it's funny that you talk about different types of time, because between being a stage manager and deciding to go to acupuncture school, I took a year and I worked as a television production coordinator. And at that point, when I was a stage manager, I was working 60 to 80 hours a week, 6 days a week. Ooh. So I got this job as a television production manager, which was 40 hours a week. They let me out when the sun was still shining, and I had 2 days off in a row. And so I was doing everything I could think of. I was rewiring my attic and landscaping my yard and refinishing furniture and God knows what else. Mm-hmm. And I would take the bus downtown. At the time we were living in Minneapolis, and I'd take the bus downtown. And I was reading this book called Einstein's Dreams, and the author has escaped me at the moment. Little book, but it goes through, each chapter goes through describing all the ideas he had about time and how it worked before he got to E equals MC squared. And so because I found this job so uneventful, it was a lot of details but it was uneventful, and it was 40 hours a week. So it was like part-time as far as I was concerned at that point in my life. I would read one chapter on the way down on the bus, and then I would spend all day pretending time worked that way.
That's so awesome.
It was hilarious. But anyway, that just made me think of that when you mentioned the different types of time. Because you can, you know, I mean, what else was Einstein doing but laying around on a couch thinking about, I wonder, what if it does it this? What if it does that?
Yeah. It's an interesting concept too, to think about time. And I guess what role do you think time plays in, like, ceremonies and art? Like, we've talked about ceremonies, like weddings and stuff like that. Like, that definitely plays with time. But what about art? Is there a relationship between art and time?
Oh, sure. I mean, there are things that, there's so many places we could go with this. I mean, there are things that are revelatory when they happen, and then later are not. I have a soon to be 18-year-old son who, I'm like, you wouldn't believe when this happened. And he'd be like, yeah, Mom, whatever. That's decades old. What does the world even look like without that in it? What are you talking about? Yeah. So from that standpoint, I think that's true. And also, there's some people can get caught up in the idea that the amount of time it takes to create something speaks to its value. And that's, for me, that's not the definition of art. For me, that's, who cares? That's why a brilliant improv artist is equally as talented in a different medium than, a Shakespearean actor. It takes completely different sets of time and training and impulse and whatever to do both of those things. And yet they're both getting up and entertaining people.
What about between like an improv actor and a cathedral? Both performances can be monumental and last a long time. But that's an interesting sort of way to look at different types of art. If you look at a cathedral that took generations to build, and then you see this final monument, you're like, wow, everybody portrayed in that. But similar to a cast of people that help each other in a beautiful play, right? And in some ways, it's synonymous.
Yeah, in some ways. And it also depends on how, I think time also impacts art in the way that it echoes.
Ooh,
and what I mean by that is, who knows what buildings were built that don't exist anymore that we can't see.
Right.
That had a huge, amazing, earth-shaking impact on the people that were alive at the time while it was there. But then as it got destroyed by a flood or, whatever, then its echo disappears. In the same way, and the same thing with a piece of, if we're going to still talk about plays, they're plays that were performed in some tiny little space in the 18th century that only a handful of people saw, but they talked about for the rest of their life, but they didn't echo. They didn't carry forward in a way beyond maybe a family story about something that then morphed into something else, and nobody knows it was a play. Some people think it actually happened to somebody in their family, and so I think that's also part of it, is how, and does it have to echo? Are there things that, there's a lot of performance art that it happens then and it's gone.
Yeah.
And if you weren't there, you missed it. And that's the way it is. And so time is malleable in some ways when it comes, time's malleable in general, but when we're talking on the subject of art, it's, it stretches and bends just like it, just like stories and life and whatnot do. Music performed in, a split, or like a jazz, like for example, I went to a friend's house a couple of months ago, and we all sat out in his backyard and played music, and we did some great stuff, and it was gone.
Yeah.
Nobody recorded it. None of us, some of us remember exactly what we started with or what key we were in, and that was about it. But it was great. And that's, and now it's gone. But it's gone as far as its whole piece, but it's not gone as far as what that did for me. So it's too snaky to talk about. It's too many rabbit warren. There's too many rabbit holes to follow down when you talk about that kind of thing.
It's slippery. It's hard to hold on to. Like, you can grab it for a moment and then it's gone. But that's what makes it so beautiful.
Well, and it's back to not being able to tell the whole story, right?
Right.
We can only talk about that spot.
Yeah. I think that's necessary, though, in order for someone to come along and pick up the story. It's almost like those old school choose your own adventure books. Like, once you've read them a few times, like, I'm not going to read it anymore. But, you can begin telling the story, or anytime you repeat a story, you change it a little bit. And I think that slippery sort of, that slippery essence to it is necessary in order for people to build the next part of the story. The character has to become the mentor at some point in time and give rise to the next hero's journey.
Right. Well, but people also are doing the same thing, right? What is it, like every 7 days, all your electrons have changed? And so what if we allow ourselves and our fellow humans, or any other living, breathing thing, allow that to be that elastic? What if we acknowledge that I mean, like I like to say when talking about the work I do with acupuncture is, you know, the medicine is so deep and so wide, and each individual is so deep and so wide. And every time I see them, they are different than the last time I saw them. And they are different 5 minutes from now. My life, I will never be bored. and what if, you know, with the people we live with, we let them be that elastic. Yeah. We let them be that constantly changing, making sure that we make, you know, checking in to make sure that that part of the story is still there, you know, like my son with butternut squash soup. You know, when we used to make curried butternut squash soup when he was little, and he loved it. He's like, I have never liked butternut squash soup, Mom. You know, and I'm like, okay, so that part of the story is not there anymore. No more butternut squash soup for you. We'll eat the rest of it. You don't get it. But, you know, something as simple as that, or something as, you know, profound as someone's, you know, gender identification or religious beliefs or political stance or, you know, whatever it is. Again, only part of the story.
Yeah. It blows my mind to think about us having the power to change or model reality just by changing our story. Like you can change the way you see the world by changing the underlying beliefs by which you live your life. And isn't that interesting for the people around us when we decide to do that? It changes our relationship with everybody. Sometimes it can lead to divorce. Sometimes it can lead to you being kicked out of the house, you know, just for changing a thing.
Or sometimes it can lead to a relationship suddenly being much more vibrant than, you know, back, you know,
said.
That it's, you know, it's not always it's not always necessarily a perceived loss.
Right.
It might actually be the thing that was missing that you were waiting to show up. And if you change, it's another thing I use a lot in the treatment room is, you know, every relationship is a tug of war. And you can change your end of the rope, but you have no control over what somebody's going to do with that on the other end. You know, they can chase you with the rope. They can sit down and cry. They can find somebody else to play with. There's 1,000 things they can do with that rope. They can let go of the rope too and go do something else.
Yeah.
But your end of the rope will have changed. And so therefore their end of the rope will change.
Is there a form of integration, like in acupuncture or what you do? You know, when I speak to a lot of people in the psychedelic space or people that work with altered states of consciousness or talk therapy or Gestalt, you know, whatever it is when it comes to that, there seems to be a point of like integration. And I'm wondering, is there something similar in the role that you're playing?
Say a little bit more.
So let's say that someone sits down for like a therapy session. One thing that a therapist may do is just reflect stuff back to them, like, oh, so you think that this is happening, or can you give me a metaphor for that? And they'll allow the person to come up with their own answers. Sometimes people will try to get it out of them, you know, or sometimes people will say, it sounds to me like that sounds like fear to me. You know, I'm wondering, is there a sort of integration process after the acupuncture or in there?
I'm always going back to how do you feel in your body?
I see.
Whether it's in my acupuncture work or my distance mind body integration work, it's always about where do you feel it in your body and how do we move it, or how do we keep that? Like one thing I'll often say when people have a positive shift in their body, I'm like, okay, now your job is to, if your mission is to choose to accept it, is what I usually say.
Mission
is to exactly is to take really careful internal notes and observations about what this feels like. So when you start to wander away from it, you can get yourself back, or you can practice trying to get yourself back to it. Because you did that. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
We just made some suggestions and you did that. And so empowering people to realize that they can move it. It's like when we first moved to Minnesota when I was, and I just started stage managing, and I can't remember if somebody told me or if I figured it out. I can't remember, or I'd read somewhere that, you know, when you get cold, you tend to tense your middle to try and pull everything in, right? Because it's okay if you lose your fingers and toes, but you want your internal organs to stay intact. And I realized that if I relaxed my middle, my fingers wouldn't get cold. And so I practiced relaxing my middle. And so it becomes a thing that when I first go outside when it's cold, the inside of me will, clench like the reaction everybody or a lot of people have. And then I'll intentionally let go of that holding and trust that my body's going to keep my internal organs. It has priorities. It's going to keep my internal organs warm, but it also will not cut off everything to my extremities in the same way.
It sounds like a great way to not only preempt the cold weather, but also a great way to have an open conversation. Because when you tighten up like that, all of a sudden you have all these blocks, you have all these reasons, why you can't do it. And your party's afraid, right?
Well, and when you come back to the whole conversation about fear and and not knowing things and uncertainty, being able, and as long as it's not a threatening situation,
right?
Which in some respects is, a lot of things when you're being threatened.
Yeah,
you're not sitting in a void of just not knowing what's going to happen.
Right.
You got some information coming in about being threatened. There's some things you still don't know about, but you also know some stuff that's really happening. But if you're in a space of just not knowing, like waiting for a job interview or, whatever the thing is that you want time to pass quickly and you also don't want it to, or whatever it is. Being able to get to put your body in a space of put yourself in your body enough to be able to just wait to hear or see, wait for input, to just wait and see what shows up. In the same way that you would if you were, I don't know, sitting in a park somewhere and didn't have anywhere to be and had 15 minutes to kill before you needed to be somewhere, and you'd already set an alarm on your phone, so you didn't even need to watch the clock. And you just watch and you wait to see what shows up. You watch a bird, and then you watch the guy walking his dog, and then you hear the two people talking, and you just watch for to see what comes in. And that's when you can get yourself in that kind of state, in not knowing, then you can respond with greater ease, for one thing. You won't be reacting. You will be taking it in and then making a decision about what you're going to do with what's going on. And it also allows for much deeper listening. Because if you're in that space of, I'm going to see what happens, then you can take in what somebody's saying and really hear them, rather than thinking of the next thing you want to say, or thinking what they're talking about, or wanting to, thinking how they're feeling about something, or thinking about something that happened to you that was similar to what happened to them, and then you're gonna, or whatever any of that is. You can just take it in, and then be reflective about it, and then be able to say, wow, that sucks. or say more about that. You want a cup of tea? And be able to continue to take it in a way that because a huge part of our culture is that people want to be heard, and they want to be listened to, and we're really good at the springtime energy of popping up out of the ground, the stuff that allows dandelions to grow out of concrete. We're good at that. And it's also, what makes everything like this, and we're good at the high summer of play and interaction and, whatever. And somewhere between those two is where you get that whole football mentality of, competition and whatever, and back and forth. But as a culture, we at least the American culture, in my opinion, Janice speaking at the moment. Our ability to savor things, our ability to go into late summer and savor things and really, really value stuff, and then to be able to move into fall and what's important and what we can let go of and what we, and what jewels we get to keep, what's a value that we get to keep. And then those two things prepare us to be able to sit in not knowing of winter, to be able to do that deep bulb in the bottom of the ground, building up potential energy, to be able to then rise up again in the springtime and have at it. We don't do that part so well. We don't do this. We don't do that slide down so well. And one of my favorite things to do this time of year is when I'm invited to a holiday party, is I will go and excuse me, I will go and be at the party and talk to people and whatever, and then I'll eventually settle somewhere, and I'll let my body go into that sort of listening space, that kind of winter. And that doesn't mean I don't tell funny stories, and that doesn't mean I don't, but it's more a funny story told around a campfire rather than a funny story yelled across the room at a 4th of July party, right? There's a different timbre to that. And it makes it less exhausting for me to be at the party. So it's sort of self-serving to begin with, but it's also really entertaining to kind of watch it out, see how many people come over and sit by me. Like, it's so peaceful over here. And it's just because I'm to some degree being lazy and not wanting to put all that effort in. But at the same time, it's aligning with the season. It's aligning with this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere. Obviously, it's a different conversation when you're in the Southern Hemisphere. But
yeah, I love the idea, the metaphor of the seasons through which we act different ways. Do you think that same metaphor can apply to like daily conversations? Is there like a cycle in conversations that can be the metaphor?
Oh, okay. So now you're asking a 5-element acupuncturist to talk to you about seasons. This is a whole nother conversation. What time is it? I do actually have to go. I do actually have to go see patients at some point in my life. All right, it's 2:05. All right. But yes is the short answer. Yes. When I say 5-element paradigm, or five seasons, or the learning platform that I'm building with folks, the 5 seasons learning, and people are like, there's only 4 seasons, Janice. I'm like, well, no, there's what I just walked you through. There's winter, there's spring, there's high summer, there's late summer, and then there's fall. Because there's a very big difference between late summer, when like the tomatoes are splitting on the vine and everything is super lush and heavy and ripe, and fall, where they've fallen off, they're rotting on the ground, the plants are dying back in, the roots are, the bulbs are pulling everything back in so they can build up energy. It's very different. So there's 5, and those cycles are what it can be applied to. They are applied to organ systems and emotions and times of day and times of year and interactions. And it's an overlay that works really well in a lot of different structures. I'm actually right now creating a course called the 5 Elements of Creativity, or the 5 Seasons of Creativity, for the platform. And it's a generative cycle. I mean, it's the bulb in the ground, it's the shoot that comes up, it's the flower, it's the seeds that are produced, it's the dying back, it's the bulb in the ground, it's that cycle, and we're all doing it,
right?
And we're all living it through the. I mean, we've spent centuries pretending that we're trying to tame nature when we're part of it.
That's so true.
It's like a bear saying, okay, now you guys are going to do what I tell you.
Yeah.
And not just because I can eat your face, but because I said so. And I made this whole thing. Now look on the wall of my cave. I've figured this whole thing out. This is how we're working. Now we're going to build everything like this, and the birds are going, I can't build anything like that. I can't pick up a tree. What are you talking about? And so it's preposterous. And so a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the things I'm passionate about, are getting people back into that thing of, having the holiday party where everybody is letting themselves slow down. And like one of the things, okay, here,
Yeah.
Venture capitalists listening, I have so many ideas for things, but this one I really think needs to happen. I think that there should be yin centers around the country. Yin being the opposite of yang, or not the partner to yang, the two ways you describe the movement of the oneness. Anyway, where you go in and there's saltwater pools, and their meditation, and there's martial arts and qigong and yoga, and everything is quiet. No clanking of machines. No, I mean, yes, if you want to go to a gym and do that, great. But no clanking of machines, no loud music playing. Everybody just comes in and they still get exercise and they still move their bodies but they also fill up on quiet. And then they go back out into the world. And how would that change things? Big on the saltwater pools. Love a saltwater pool. But that be that, you know, I think half the reason people buy gym memberships and never go is because they're already exhausted and they're like, I just don't want to go into that den of activity. I just don't have it in me. You know, where it's like, I need to go float in a saltwater pool. I need to go quietly, you know, do whatever with, you know.
Yeah. Those isolation tanks do wonders.
Yeah.
Right?
They're allowed in there too. All of it, you know, it's just quiet spaces, you know, dark rooms where people just go sit in the dark. Yeah. How do you get okay with not knowing? Go sit in the dark. The thing that I miss many things about being a stage manager. I do not miss other things, but I miss many things about being a stage manager. And one of the things I miss the most is at the end of a show, preferably the end of the run of a show, but just on any given night, of having closed down the theater, everybody's left. I walk in onto the main stage. I look out. I take the ghost light. I turn off all the other lights, and for just a minute, I stand there on the lip of the orchestra pit, and I cannot see my hand when it's here. And when I do that, everything would just drop off of me. All of the weight of the job and everything would just fall off my back. And then I'd turn on the ghost light, which is a single light bulb on a pole that is traditionally set in the middle of a stage. The practical being, anybody wanders in here, they're not going to fall in the orchestra pit and sue us. The mythical piece of it being that so much energy gets put into creating characters on stage that stays, and that haunts the space. And so this allows them to relax and recede and whatever, and set for the next day, make space for the characters the next day. But that in itself, just standing in the dark, that kind of dark, because it's hard to find that kind of dark on the planet anymore.
Yeah.
And there's some place in Europe that has created a dark space like that, scientifically created a dark space, like done readings and everything. And they have a wait list of like years, and they're charging gajillions of dollars for people to go in and be in the dark. Anyway. I'm bouncing all over the place, but welcome to talking to me.
I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's fascinating to see the way in which the connections are made. And, you know, I love the idea of the esoteric, like the ghost light and the magic that happens on stage and the darkness. And when I think about darkness, I think about growing up in a world where, you know, a lot of people have a lot of problems. And I think a lot of nonlinears find themselves growing up in chaos, and chaos is kind of dark. Like, you don't know what's happening around you, but at a young age, your relationship with chaos has a transformative pathway for you to follow for later in life. And I think that's why you embrace it later in life. You're like, oh, this is home, you know? Yeah, it's dark. It's kind of scary. I don't know is it a bird or a bear? I don't know, but it's just real peaceful right here. You know, and most people are like, what are you doing over there? You're like, come on over. They're like, I am staying the hell out. I don't want to be around you. You are a weirdo. I don't want to be around you. You know, you're like, why? It's beautiful over here. Come on in.
Well, after when I say about my stage management career, is my understanding of chaos and fatigue is so much deeper and wider than anybody who wasn't in the military. Then I can't explain it to you. But yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, I was actually everywhere I go, I'm a little bit like the niece in the Munsters, because even in the nonlinear community of the Octopus Movement, of which we are both a part, I had a completely lucky childhood. I mean, there were some events that then I had to deal with later, but they were all external forces outside of my house. And generally speaking, and there was no understanding that I was different. I was just, that's just Janice.
Yeah.
That's just Janice over there being herself, and so in some ways I feel sort of, like I should apologize for not having more, dark, scary, chaotic things to talk about from that period of my life. And I do think that, people, well, first of all, I'd like to say, have you ever met a linear 2-year-old?
Nope.
I think linearity is an overlay. And I think people get comfortable with it because it provides security. It provides safety. It provides predictability. But linearity is an overlay.
Yeah.
None of us show up, making spreadsheets. Don't get me wrong. I love a pretty spreadsheet, but don't, in the same way that I like a nice smooth marble run. But anyway, moving on. But we don't start buying into, I mean, even kids that like organize and lay out all their toys in a particular order. I say, from my observations, granted, I'm not looking at the whole human race, that it's about the beauty of it. It's not about the control or the detail or maybe the detail if the detail's beautiful, but I think it's about I think any of those impulses start off about the beauty of it. And then they become an overlay for how to fit in or control or, when I was a stage manager, I was a little nutty. I mean, first of all, I got into it. That's another conversation. I'm not going to tell you that story, but I got into stage management purely by accident. I was sort of kidnapped into it. And, so I was constantly in fear that somebody was going to figure out that I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so everything became very tight. Like all my forms were like gorgeous and really tight, and all the information had to be just so, because, oh my God, what if somebody figures it out? And now I love a pretty spreadsheet, but I like it because my goal is now, when I was the director of clinical education at the university, I used to say to the provost, I don't want to control anything. What I want to do is create a really pretty marble run that I set the marble at the top at the beginning, and I go read a book or watch a movie or hang out with a friend or have a good lunch, and I come back and it's at the bottom. And I am perfectly willing to sand pieces of the marble run or paint it a different color because it'll be more aesthetically pleasing, or change the route because it makes more sense for somebody. But really, honestly, I don't want to watch the marble all the way down to the bottom of the run. I want to set up the run and let it be beautiful and leave. Which is the same thing. If you look at like paperwork I created as a stage manager and paperwork I create now, you wouldn't see a whole lot of difference, but it's such a different animal. Which goes back to, you've never met a linear 2 or 3-year-old. It's when you allow yourself that freedom of being the way you came in, then it's a completely different conversation. It may look exactly the same, but the experience of it, the story, the circle is so much bigger.
Yeah.
How's that for wrapping it all together?
I like it. It's, yeah. The illusion of control. You know, like I know some people that like, I got to put all my cups, the handles have to be this way.
Because it's pretty.
It's so confining. Like I can't, like my wife is
for
like,
you.
For me.
Yeah, for you. It's beautiful. It may very well be beautiful for her.
She loves every part of it. And I see the beauty in it. But for me, it's like, I'll go move it just a little bit and see if she notices. And she always does. What are you doing? I had a 45-degree angle.
Okay. So.
And I love it. That's so weird. Like I love doing it.
I know, but it's still but so there's a little bit more control than the beauty in there, right? There's a little bit more need for security or feeling like it needs to be, that it's safer to have it all like that.
That's a good word for it. I think safe is.
But why, you know, how do you lead the conversation towards beauty is the question. See, something just changed in your body. What happened?
I think that's the reason why I'm so attracted to her, is it's a different shade of beauty that I'm not used to and I don't understand, and I'm mesmerized and thankful for it. It's mysterious to me, you know, like is it that? Is it that? And then all these questions come up. Thank you for that. Thank you.
What changed in your body? Because something changed when you sighed.
Like a slight dizziness that moved from my head to my toes. Like, what is that? You know, and it's like maybe that's the sense of beauty or sense of wonder that moves through me when I think about my wife moving a cup, which may be my wife, which may be our relationship, which may be my daughter. You know, it might be all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or may just be, or just maybe more space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it could be. That very well could be. It's the miracle that allows you to see beauty in the shifting of a 45-degree handle on a cup. That's so crazy. I know.
Isn't it?
Yeah, you're good at what you do. You can see the unseen things. You just did it for me.
I will never be bored.
Does it ever get exhausting though?
Not if I'm doing it right. I was just saying to a patient last night, that because he's starting to lead these groups in these refugee groups and the people working with them and conversations, and he loves doing it. And he's asking, he actually sort of comes to me as a coach more than a patient, but I put needles in him anyway because it helps smooth things. But I was saying, he's like, but I was exhausted afterwards. And I'm like, that's because you were only doing this. I said, see if you can't figure out a way that you do this. And you're not taking anything from anybody else. What you're doing is you're creating the third thing in the middle. You know, what's the thing? If there's two people in a room, there's three relationships. Right? One with yourself, one with myself, and the one we have in the middle, right? And so if you create it so it's doing this, then you're both fed. And so if I'm doing it right, then like yesterday, I got terrible sleep the night before. And I woke up super groggy and whatever, and I biked to work and I got ready for work, and the biking helped a little bit. But by the time I got ready to go home last night, I felt 10 times better than I did when I started. So no, it's not exhausting if I do it right. If I'm getting exhausted, then it's a sign. It's a signal to me that I'm not walking my talk. I'm not doing my thing.
It's an interesting point of view that most people could probably take and use in their life. Like, it should be fulfilling as much as it is giving. I don't think that came out right.
No. Well, I mean, it comes back to life is too short not to be having a good time.
Yeah.
And I mean, the two things I've said in every job interview I've ever had since I applied to work my first job at some place in the mall when I was in high school, is life is too short not to be having a good time. And if I probably didn't say this one then, I think I said this one later when I was an adult. But if the process of getting there is not as rewarding as the final product, then I haven't done my job.
Mm.
And particularly as a stage manager, that was true, because honest to God, that is way too much work to only be hanging it on opening night.
Yeah, that's, you know, are you okay on time? Do you have time for another couple questions?
Let me look at
I
my
think I've
calendar
already
because
passed
it
an
tells
hour.
me. Oh,
I know.
Yeah, we have like
Okay.
by 20 minutes. Let me just make sure my calendar isn't yelling at me. Hold on. Because, no, I'm good.
I do.
I'm good.
So here's something that comes to mind that when you talk about the job interview, the stage management, and something that I've seen recently happening in our world is this process of verbing nouns. And so, if you look at a person, place, or thing, it's kind of becoming a process. Like Google used to be, it's a thing, but it's also now you Google something. And it seems to me when we look at our lives, instead of looking at George or Janice as a person, you can look at them as a process. And I think it really helps you have a lot more leniency in who you are, what you're doing, who you're becoming, who you were. What's your take on this, looking at nouns as verbs or verbing nouns, especially in our own life?
Okay, so clearly you have psychically listened in on conversations around my kitchen table. We're the three of us are a very we're logophiles. We are lovers of words, and so we have discussions about how they're used a lot and how they're not used, and how language morphs, and how, and should we let it morph, and that's ridiculous because it was better when it was before, and lots of opinions, and we all change opinions depending on the moment. But I mean, I think, well, for example, this whole 5-element paradigm is actually a snapshot, like a millisecond of a millisecond of a millisecond snapshot of the movement of yin and yang, which is a millisecond of a millisecond of a millisecond snapshot of the movement of the oneness. And it's just different. It's just ways to describe the oneness. Everything is just ways to describe the oneness in that paradigm, right? And so, sure, I'm out here Janicing the world because all you're getting is this hour and 20 minutes of me that will be different in a minute after, 5 seconds after I turn off my camera. And we're constantly in motion, and that whole thing of, your electrons replenish themselves every 7 days, and all our cells are, I don't remember the amount of time that your cells are all new. And so we're always changing. And to some degree, who we are and what we're doing is an idea, or a habit that's working for us or not. And what really made that particular concept sink in for me was I had a colleague years ago who had a patient, an acupuncture colleague, who had a patient who had multiple personalities. And that patient would come in, and depending on which personality was in charge, their body would change. Their breasts would be more prominent, or they would recede. Their one personality had an allergy to strawberries, the other one didn't. Just one of them was pre-diabetic, one of them wasn't. And we're talking about, like, particularly with the pre-diabetes, we're talking about something on a cellular level shifting when that personality got in charge. And that's when I was like, oh, this is all an idea. This is all that we are all just making this up as we go along. And so, yeah, absolutely. We're all verbing it. Okay. How far do I want to go down this rabbit hole? It brings to mind 2 stories. One, did you ever watch Deep Space Nine?
I have, yeah.
Okay. You know the character Odo?
Was he the Ferengi?
No, he's the guy that dissolves into a puddle.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And he goes back to his home planet and he just pours himself into the ocean of his planet. And then he pours himself back out into a bucket and goes back to his role, right? At the space station. All right. Take that idea. Then take a conversation I had with my son when he was like 2 or 3 years old. We had gone to the Science Foundation, or the Science Museum here in Baltimore. And they were doing, in their big IMAX theater, they were doing a thing on dark matter. And he really wanted to go see it. And I said, I'm not going to understand it. You were what, 2, 3 years old? You were really not going to get this. And he's like, no, I want to go. Yeah, fine. So we go in and we watch the whole thing on dark matter. We see the rest of the museum, blah, blah, blah. We get in the car. We're driving home. He's in his little car seat in the back. It's all quiet. And then he says, I think I figured it out. And I said, okay. Now, bear in mind, he's being raised by an acupuncturist, so he has weird language anyway. And he says, I think that dark matter is the chi of all the plants and the animals and the people that's not being used right now. And when a new person's born, a drop comes down and animates them. But otherwise, it's just up there helping hold the universe together.
I think he does have it figured out.
You think? So back to this thing of us doing things, right? We're really just ice cubes in water. I mean, we really are just the oneness solidified into this shape, and then I will desolidify into this shape at some point. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have a deep understanding of past lives and other experiences like that. However, maybe running with this theory, or this hypothesis, really, it's not a theory, of maybe those people get more of that same drop, more of that original drop, than somebody who gets like a completely different drop that, doesn't remember anything. Maybe they get some of the drop that says, oh yeah, I used to be,
right,
Catherine the Great or whatever, who knows? I don't know. Anyway, so that's the answer. That's the answer to your very short question. Yeah, this is okay. You let me run off leash and here.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. I love the idea of ice cubes in the water, because sometimes it does seem to me as I'm moving through my life, like the rough edges of needing to be right, or the jagged edges, the sharpness to my ideas of, they're kind of being smoothed out, and it's like, yeah, I can totally see myself in that person. Or you know what, they probably do that because they had a bad day. Or you know what, I do that. Like, It's interesting to see yourself kind of being let out into the rest of the world like that. It's kind of wonderful, really.
Yeah, it is. It's lovely. Also, it makes things a lot less lonely.
Yeah, that's a big part of. It seems to me that's a big part, or perhaps that's one of the underlying mechanisms of so much anger or distrust in the world, is just,
or
I'm
fear.
alone. Fear. Yeah. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. What is the relationship between loneliness and fear? You could probably wrap that up in about a minute, right?
Yeah, no problem. I got this. Sit down. I'll take care of it. Okay. Back to the medicine the corner of the medicine that I practice. There's a strong connection between what we call the heart-kidney axis. Mm-hmm. And the heart is the center of all of who you are. And in the poetry of the medicine, the Shen, spirit descends into the heart, and then it's refracted into all the other organs and parts of you by like light through a stained glass window. And the emotions associated with the heart are joy and sadness and loneliness. And sadness, not grief. Grief is another ball of wax, but sadness, loneliness. And the kidney is associated, and the space between your two kidneys is associated with your jing, or what you came in with, your DNA, your imprint. It's said that your lower dantian, which is about a hand's width below your belly button and halfway between your hip bones and halfway between the front of you and the back of you, it's your lower energy center. And some say that it's where the first cell divides that grows into who you are. But there's a strong connection between there and your heart, right? Because those are the things that make you you. You can be brain dead and still be alive, but you cannot be heart dead and still be alive. And all of the rest of this is so that your heart can move around and experience the world. Your eyes are here so your heart can see the world. Your hands are here so that your heart can touch the world, etc. But that heart-kidney axis is really important. And the emotions associated with the kidneys are fear and courage. And so those two balance each other in a way that allows us to keep our center. And that connection can be broken with sudden divorce or heartbreak or trauma, and so reestablishing that heart-kidney axis allows us to manage fear and courage and joy and sadness in a balanced way. Now, from an elemental standpoint, what you're thinking about is how fire can be contained by running water around it. So the heart being associated with fire, the kidneys being associated with water. And so it creates containment. That courage and even that fear to some degree creates containment so that your joy doesn't go completely off the charts and you become manic, and also your sadness. That courage helps you get through that sadness and contain that sadness in a way. So that's how running with the paradigms and the stories that I use to see the world. That's how I think of those being connected. So that was it. That didn't take too long. I sort of got that in a short period of time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about your eyes being the way in which your heart sees the world, and your hands being the way in which your heart can touch the world. Like, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I'll never be bored.
Yeah,
it's like watching poet. It's like I also say, again, back to acupuncture. Although it's to some degree true, it actually is also true for the distance mind body stuff that I've developed. But particularly with acupuncture, when people find out you're an acupuncturist, they always want to talk to you about the needles. And I always feel like somebody is saying, "Oh, you're a poet. What's it like to sharpen pencils?"
That's hilarious.
Because each point is described by a character, right? Whether it's a Japanese character or a Chinese character or a Korean character, each acupuncture point is described by a character, which is an entire world, an entire story about the point. And so it's a lot like doing poetry on people.
Mm-hmm.
Asking the different stories and pieces of poetry to work together in a way that allows the whole thing to tell a better story.
I was just going to ask when you what the comment, the poetry of the medicine was, but that maybe you can elaborate. Like, it really weaves together the way in which one can heal someone if they can understand a poetic story about what is it a Romeo and Juliet, or is it the hero's journey? It seems, are the points tied, the blockages tied to different mythological structures like that, or poetic stories?
Not mythology. How to answer that question? There's a lot that feeds into. Well, it can be something as superficial as like the translation of a name. Like there's an upper point up here on your chest that everybody has one. That some translations of into English, some translations of the character are spirit storehouse. My personal favorite translation of the character is by a woman named Deborah Katz in her book of point descriptions, which is Pantry of Dreams. They are both they are both associated with that fire element, with the heart, but not just with the heart, also with the small intestine, also with the pericardium, which protects the heart, also with the sun jiao, which is not in Western medicine, except it kind of plays into the endocrine system and the polyvagal system. Anyway, moving on. So it can be something as superficial as an understanding of the character, or an understanding of the translation of the character, or being able to language the character. It can be as multifaceted as understanding how the elements move and where things are getting stuck for that person. So how do you open that up? How do you connect the pieces so that the flow continues to happen? Because if you think about a piece of poetry, it flows.
Yeah.
And it does it with the least amount of words. I mean, even if it's an epic poem, it's telling you such a story that it's really should take, 12 volumes, right. And it's telling it to you in, 50 pages or something, right? It's distilling things to just that, which is also why I'm always in search of the one needle treatment. So I can just go pink, and then everything goes. Because again, back to they do all the work. I just make the suggestion. And there are points and each point you can do it because it has a physical response. You can do it because it's going to clear heat from their system and thereby stop them from getting yellow snot and, and high blood pressure or whatever, right? You can do it because it affects the endocrine system. You can do it, there's a lot of sort of Western ways you can draw analogies. Or you can do it because it's going to balance springtime and fall in them in a way that will allow them to not beat up on themselves as much. Or you can do it in a way that you're just going for that story that the point tells, and you're reminding that version of life of that story. And lots of other, I could rattle on, but it's, so that's what I mean when I say the poetry of the medicine, is that it's always, it's that smooth flow of chi. I mean, poetry is not, even Billy Collins, who is one of my favorite poets, who is rather irreverent sometimes, it's still got a smooth flow to it, even when it suddenly surprises you about something.
Yeah, sometimes that's the real clincher, when it has a smooth flow, but it still surprises you. That's like that. That's a pretty wonderful harmony, or awful in the true sense of the word, right?
Right. Awful.
Yeah. Well, Thomas Hutchinson asks, shout out. Let me just say thank you to everybody, to Michelle. Thank you for everything. Thomas, thank you for everything. It's so wonderful to be part of the Octopus community. I'm so thankful to get everybody in here and start talking a little bit. Look at Thomas just kind of messing with us right here. Yeah, it's a great idea. Why don't you guys talk about the belief system, imagination, creativity, and wrap that up? Thanks, Thomas.
No problem.
Michelle makes some wonderful points too. Like, would we ever know the whole picture though? I feel we need to make peace with the fact that we'll never know it. Like, this is why Michelle is so awesome. And if you read all her points, they're so erudite. We'll be talking to her soon. I'm hopeful. So,
but she's great. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed this, Dr. Janice, and I've walked you right up to the 1:30 mark, and I'm really thankful for your time. And I feel like we just scratched the surface. It was all my conversations with people have just blown by. So.
We could go on for days, and there are other things that we could be doing too. So yeah.
I know. Well, before I let you go, where can people find you? What do you have coming up, and what are you excited about?
Oh goodness. You can find me at drjaniccampbell.com, drjaniccampbell.com. Janice spelled ICE, not IS, like Joplin.
And the last one, how do you spell that again too?
Campbell, just like Campbell, just like the soup. Campbell. And I'm also on LinkedIn under Dr. Janice Campbell. I'm also on Facebook under Janice F. Campbell. And if you're curious about the distance mind-body integration stuff, you can find that on my website, both for individuals and also for groups. I'm moving into doing things for corporate groups to help set the space for people to be in like a week-long or weekend-long, workshop or something, and be able to actually process the information and also be able to take real honest to goodness breaks between ingesting all that. So you can find me online in those places. Things I'm excited about. Well, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the expansion of my distance mind-body integration work. And I'm also excited about the official launching of 5seasonslearning.com, which will be in January. We've released some courses to begin with, but there's going to be continuing education courses for starting with acupuncturists and herbalists and hopefully expanding to other modalities, as well as community classes, all in some way influenced by this idea of the 5 seasons and how we move in them and how they apply to the way we live our lives and us being part of nature. So I'm excited about that too. I think it's going to be cool. And yeah. I'm sure there are other things. I'm writing a book and there's some other things. But go to Dr. Janice. I had to make the drjanice.com, drjanicecampbell.com website to like cover all my stuff. It saves time when having conversations with people. I'm like, go look at that and then tell me what you want to talk to me about. Which, by the way, most of which you got from George's introduction of me. He did this amazing distillation of everything on my website. Anyway, that's what I'm excited about, and I'm also very excited about the Octopus Movement. I'm on the board for the American nonprofit arm of the Octopus Movement, and it's full of great people, and we're going to do some wonderful things. So, stay tuned.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, go down to the show notes, check it out, reach out to Dr. Janice. Thank you for everyone who played along, and if you find yourself intrigued, just go down and check out the show notes, check out all the links down there, and hang on. Dr. Janice will talk to you briefly afterwards. But to everyone that was out there listening, I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope you realize that there's order in chaos and that the world is conspiring to help you if you just take a moment to recognize. That's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.
Bye.